Welcome back, everyone. We are now here with the amazing George Galloway, who is a longtime MP and as well as an activist, a radio TV host, and just all-around amazing human being. We're so privileged to have him with us today. Thank you, George, for joining us.
The honor is entirely mine, and to share the stage, as it were, with the distinguished cast that you've had over this weekend is doubly an honor. But it would be an honor to stand on my own on a street corner and to proselytize for Julian Assange, one of the greatest men of the age, a man who should be a Nobel Prize laureate, not banged up in an exceedingly hot room, I've no doubt, in the Ecuador Embassy, a political prisoner.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So can you explain for our audience, for the sake of any of our listeners and viewers who don't know, what drew you initially to support WikiLeaks and Julian Assange? If you can tell us your personal journey in that, that would be wonderful.
Well, I was one of the leaders of the anti-war movement in Britain against the Iraq war. And so as such, I am one of those indebted to Julian Assange and his brothers and sisters who supplied WikiLeaks with secrets that should never have been secret, crimes that were being carried out in our name, on our dollar, under our flag. And if not for the courageous work of WikiLeaks and those who blew whistles all over the place on these crimes, our anti-war movement would have been weaker, and the pressure on our war leaders and post-war leaders, if they deserve the title leaders, would have been much less. So I don't follow WikiLeaks quite as closely as others on this vigil. And I especially don't follow their American work particularly closely. So I won't speak about that if that's okay. But I do want to say that Julian Assange and his friends blew the whistle on war crimes, on crimes against humanity. And it's the duty of every person, not least a journalist and broadcaster, to blow the whistle. And if we lived in a decent, civilized, sane world, the whistleblower would be the hero. The whistleblower would be the person to whom we paid tribute. But that happened to Julian. He has been maligned, slandered, hunted, and hunted down now to that little hot room in London that I spoke about. Nowadays, we can't see him, but in the times that I was able to see him, I felt I was in the presence of a great person, of a person like Dr. Cynthia was just talking about, a person of the caliber of the people that she was talking about, a person who was ready to pay the price for standing up for what's right, a prisoner of conscience, a political prisoner, an underdog soldier in the night, albeit one at a keyboard rather than in the hills or in the jungle somewhere, and no less worthy of everybody's respect. Now, I understand why the war industry, why the military-industrial complex, why the deep state in the United States and its satellite countries hate Julian Assange. I would expect no less than that. But what is more difficult to understand is how the useful idiots amongst the so-called liberal classes, the chatterati, who would normally be found on the side of whistleblowers, except when they're shopping them to the police and breaking up their hard disks, if you get my drift. How they have first abandoned, then turned on Julian Assange, shows them for what they really are, the conservative and liberal, two cheeks of the same backside, who in the end are loyal to the state we're in. When, as Dr. Cynthia was just saying, we'll never get out of the state we're in until we change the state we're in. And my goodness, Julian Assange has shown plenty of both.
Absolutely. And I think your point about the fact that he is bearing so much weight on behalf of everyone else, whether it's the whistleblowers that come to WikiLeaks or the public that benefits from the information they publish, he is bearing the truth on his back.
And he's the one who's paying that price. The rest of us are at home with our families and enjoying life. And there's not a day goes by when I don't think of this Calvary which Julian is trapped in. And there's not a day in which indignation doesn't rise in my throat at the situation that he finds himself in. So the very least we can do is to stand up and be counted on his side. And paid something of a political price for it myself at the hands of the right-on and liberal classes. But I knew from the beginning that Julian was being set up. He was being set up in a classic trap that has been played out. It's in the playbook. It's been used many times. And so I never doubted for one moment Julian Assange's bona fides, his integrity. And he's having to show that integrity now every single day in the situation he's in.
How do you think the public should fight for Julian Assange, other than watching these types of vigils and tuning in and sharing them? What are some of the ways they can actively empower themselves in fighting for Julian Assange and his freedom?
We need to never allow a piece of disinformation to pass unchallenged. So I have the best part of 2 million followers on social media. Whenever I see the utterly false allegation about Julian and Sweden and rape and so on, I never allow it to stand. I challenge it every time. Sometimes even our own supporters make mistakes in not challenging. Someone just the other day, one of our supporters on Twitter said the Swedes had dropped the charges. There were no charges. He wasn't charged. They refused to come to London and interview him as part of their inquiry into him. That's all there was. Even though they had done so many times, even with murder suspects. And of course, you don't need to be Einstein to work out why they didn't want to come to London to conduct an investigation, to have an interview with him. They didn't want to because it would, as it did in the end, have to lead to the collapse of this entire line of investigation, of this false charge. And its only purpose was to get hold of Julian, to then extradite him to the United States. It's not about sexual matters or orientation or any of these other issues. It's about whether the United States deep state machine can get their hands on Julian Assange and silence him forever. and punish him for the rest of his life, as they intended to do for decades with Chelsea Clinton, with Chelsea Manning, forgive me. They intended that we would never hear from her again until she was an old woman. And the same would be true of Julian. So sweep all these other things away. This is about the United States trying to punish Julian Assange, trying to silence Julian Assange. And he's already now, for the last few months, been silenced. He's being punished, of course, by his unjust incarceration by the British state. And people say to me all the time, this weekend, good comrades of mine said to me this weekend, look, why don't he just walk out? The answer is, if he walks out, the British will extradite him to the United States. If it was just walking out and facing whatever punishment there was for breaking bail conditions, of course that would be a no-brainer. But as soon as he walked out, he'd be in British hands, and the United States would immediately demand his extradition to the United States to face indictments already prepared by secret grand juries, alleging espionage and all kinds of damage to the United States so-called security. In fact, all he's ever done is by the United States and Britain and other countries in the US satellite orbit. And that's why he's a hero for me and will never ever be a villain.
Yeah, I think the point you're making about the fact that these sexual abuse allegations and the investigation into that was such a feeble cover for the United States and the UK's persecution of Assange. And now we see very clearly that after that investigation is dropped, he is silenced after that point. And that makes him more and more obviously a political prisoner suffering persecution for his work, not for anything to do with his personality. So I think Absolutely. That's a really huge thing to discuss.
He's a prisoner of conscience, and he's a prisoner of our conscience. I don't mean to make him Jesus. He's not Jesus. He's not on a cross giving his blood for our sins. No. But he's a prisoner for our conscience because he was acting as a conscience for us. And we are not being punished, and he is being punished. And what a punishment it is. I've had the benefit of many times visiting him when his conditions were far, far better than they are now. And then they were extremely onerous. No walk in a yard, no sight of the sky, no breath of fresh air, no unsupervised time. It's wonderful that the former president of Ecuador had the courage to give Julian asylum. And the diplomats in the embassy for a long time did their best to make Julian Assange as comfortable as possible. But even with all their efforts, it was a terrible, punitive incarceration that he had been subjected to. And that's when he could receive us. That's when we could take him in, cream cakes and bottles of lemonade. That's when he could have company, when his friends and people who admired him could keep his spirits up. He's now in a solitary confinement, more one in solitary confinement anywhere in the world. Even the Rivonia prisoners were able to walk out in the yard on Robben Island. They were able to fraternize with each other on Robben Island. And of course, the length of time they were incarcerated was far more than Julian. But it's been more than 5 years already. And Now he can't walk anywhere, and he can't fraternize with anyone, even his own mother and father. Imagine, even the worst prisoner in the world, even a mass murderer in a jail, can phone home in the telephone box. Julian can do none of these things. He doesn't even know we're talking to each other now. He doesn't know how our hearts are beating for him now. He doesn't know how much we miss him, how much we love him. He's cut off completely from us, from society. This is a very, very big crime. And I'm deeply ashamed that our government is using our taxes to implement this crime.
Absolutely.
Sorry, emotional there.
No, that's exactly. I think that without that emotion, nothing will really change. I think people have to really conceptualize and let it sink in the degree of suffering that he has endured before this additional isolation was put into place. As Susie Dawson wrote, as many people have noted, in 2016, you know, his doctors were warning about his health and the severe pain that he's in physically, much less this new emotional and mental pain from isolation. Absolutely horrendous. And I don't think, and as you said, even prisoners would have the space to walk in a yard, and even prisoners get basic medical care that Julian Assange can't receive. So it's beyond ludicrous. He's never been charged publicly with anything, and this is the way that he's being treated. So
he was not a well man even back then, you know. He of exposure to sunlight, to fresh air. He was suffering, as anyone would, in a small room. People think, the people I was talking to at the weekend, they think when you say the word embassy, and they've seen the pictures of that big building, they don't know that it's only the ground floor left in that building. And most of that is the embassy. It's only one floor. It's not bigger than the hall I'm sitting in now. And that's for everybody. Julian's part of it is tiny. So he wasn't a well man then. Imagine the psychological and emotional turmoil and degradation that is going on as he is now completely sealed, like the Count of Monte Cristo in a tomb, unable to reach out and unable to be reached.
And that is the truth that people have, outside of this vigil and outside of the demonstrations of solidarity, too few people actually conceive that and understand it. And that's why, unfortunately, you know, you're having conversations with people who don't understand the suffering that he's going through.
People who are sympathetic to us. You know, these are well-wishers, but they imagine that Julian's in that whole building that you see on TV.
Absolutely. How do you think?
And he can smell the bacon from the Harrods, but he can smell nothing. He can see nothing.
How do you think we can raise awareness of that situation that he's in right now, so that the well-wishers that you mentioned wouldn't be so ill-informed about the reality of his situation?
Well, I know that those of you who are closest to the case, yourself amongst them, are working as hard as they possibly can. Maybe all of us have to renew our vows here this evening, to work more if that's possible, to work better if that's possible. Never to allow a piece of misinformation, disinformation, or just ignorance, and I don't mean ignorance in a pejorative, to go unanswered. Maybe all of us who have a social media presence have to every day make a point, every single day, of raising this case. And perhaps, maybe if I can make one constructive suggestion, it would be perhaps don't assume a level of knowledge that we have that knowledge is widespread and everyone has it. So when we talk about the embassy, let's talk about how big the embassy is. Let's talk about what space Julian has been living in for more than 5 years. For nothing, as you say, he's not only not been convicted of any crime, he's never been charged with any crime. He has committed no crime. All he's committed, on the other hand, is acts of great humanity, exposing other people's crimes. He should be the toast of the journalistic fraternity. He should be on the lips of every person who calls themselves a journalist, a lover of freedom. They're always talking about others. They're always, Aung San Suu Kyi was a long time under house arrest in much less onerous circumstances. She became a Nobel laureate. She was lionized, made a free woman of the city in capitals and big cities everywhere in the world. Julian has been shut out. Karen Silkwood, they made an Academy Award-winning movie out of her whistleblowing. Julian, the door has been closed on him. And it's worse than a cell door, much, much worse than a cell door.
And I know that that you've been a long time anti-war advocate, and I was wondering what were the most significant publications that WikiLeaks made public that struck home on that front for you.
Yeah, in my film, The Killings of Tony Blair, I used footage from WikiLeaks. In fact, the film opens with two infamous clips. The American voice saying, light them up, as these Iraqi civilians and journalists, by the way, are then eviscerated in machine gun fire. That's how the film begins. And then the second scene, I think, is the American soldiers in a bombed out building, and one of the soldiers shouting, he's pretending he's dead, and then firing his weapon and saying, he's effing dead now. Both of these pieces of footage were used in my film. But during the run-up to the war, through the war, and in the aftermath of the war, I say the war, of course, there have been many wars before and after, but the Iraq war, for someone of my generation, is burned most vividly into our brains. And WikiLeaks was an essential tool for us in that struggle. The cables, the US diplomatic cables, were like gold dust for us because they shone a light, a bright light, in places that would have been otherwise in darkness, and arrows that were flying in darkness and would have done their dirty work without their purveyor ever being known, were exposed by. Will always be a hero to me.
Absolutely, and it's really you know, frustrating to see not just the US but the UK government's role in persecuting you know, a journalist who, as we've said multiple times, hasn't been charged, much less convicted publicly with any crime. What is your feeling towards the UK government as it continues to be such an instrument of the US in this case?
Correct me if I've got the number wrong, but I think we've spent about £15 million on the Metropolitan Police coverage of the Ecuador Embassy. This at a time when London is in the grip of a murder wave, when we have more murders than New York City, imagine, when someone is checking in to a hospital in London with a stab wound every 12 minutes, 5 per hour, when people are discharging machine guns at other people in London, when we have whatever stage our alert is, it must be high. We are constantly told, and we are, not just told, we are constantly at risk from terrorism in London, and we can spare all these officers and spend all this money on Julian Assange, who hasn't committed any crime. This is a kind of madness. And it's also because, this is a difficult thing to say, because of course the judiciary in Britain is theoretically independent. But I have no doubt at all that if Julian falls into the hands of the British courts, he will be extradited. Somehow will ensure that. And if he disappears into the maw of the US justice system, we'll never see him again. We won't even see him at his trial. His trial will be held in secret, in camera, and we'll never see him again. We'll never touch his hand again. And therefore, the stakes could not be higher. And it's such a pity. I don't know if you don't want to go into this, stop me. But that the former president of Ecuador has himself now fallen victim.
No, that's something I'd like you to talk about, please. That's incredibly important.
Yeah. He has himself fallen victim to another setup. You know, you couldn't make it up. First, they get Julian behind the 8 ball, and then they go after the man who allowed him at least to be at the table, at the pool table. And there's no outrage about it. Not many people even know about it. And candidly, I didn't know about it until a few days ago. And it's such an obvious playbook going on here. Pressure on Ecuador to somehow deliver up this prize for the American deep state, and additional pressure by an arrest warrant now executed in Belgium, for goodness sake, against the former president of Ecuador. They're trying everything. They're trying everything that they can to extinguish this light that is Julian Assange. And all we can do is pray and agitate and organize to build the biggest and best solidarity movement outside that we can. And I take my hat off to those of you who spend so much time doing that.
But what we are doing and organizing would not be possible if it wasn't for guests like yourself willing to come on and not only express solidarity with Julian, but to talk about it in the way that it actually exists, as opposed to the way that the media wants us to perceive it having happened. And the ongoing horror that is happening to Julian Assange is something that, again, we would not be able to just sit here and talk about by ourselves. It takes amazing panelists like you to come on and describe that. So thank you.
People have joined you this weekend. I've seen people of great eminence and people of historical importance have joined the vigil, and it's true that some of the best people in the world are with you in this campaign. But a lot of people who should be are not. And they need to examine their own consciences as to why they are not.
I think that's a really, really important point. Definitely. It is sometimes very disappointing to see people that otherwise stand for the values that Julian Assange and WikiLeaks have held up, not coming to their aid and their defense. I think that that's unfortunately evidence of the degree of persecution as far as character. The character assassination of Julian Assange has been relentless over the years. So I think that,
you know, this happens to political prisoners. It's not enough just to bang them up. You have to reduce their purchase on the outside. You have to reduce their reputation, and you have to, that's true, and enlarge it, and you have to invent that which is not true if you can't find anything that is. And both of these things have happened with Julian. And, you know, the most outlandish lies. You know, I read in liberal newspapers that, you know, Julian's rude to people. Well, first of all, I know that that is not true. And my whole family, including my children, know that that is not true. But even if it was true, the world is full of rude people, and he would have more reason than most to be rude, but he isn't rude. I've even read in liberal papers, I should name them, but perhaps I won't, you know, that he has bad personal hygiene and all this kind of utter garbage, Goebbelian lies, but they are all used to chip away at the real Julian Assange and to chip away at his standing so that they can peel off layer after layer of those who know in their hearts that they should be here on this vigil tonight, and who are looking for excuses not to be. And those excuses are oftentimes so bizarre, so banal, as to be a real discredit to them.
Absolutely. And I think that the fact that the media has reduced itself to making fun of Julian Assange's hygiene is so telling about their character and the level that they have to stoop to trivialize the pain and suffering that Julian goes through. It says everything about the media and nothing about Julian Assange.
Well, there was one of them I did in fact respond to, which claimed that Julian had walked into the boardroom in the Ecuador Embassy without his trousers while an important diplomatic meeting was taking place. First of all, there is no boardroom. Secondly, the person who it was said had told this story and who had been a worker in the embassy, had never actually worked in the embassy. And thirdly, Julian would never walk around without his trousers. And that's the level. That's the level of evil, wickedness that is deployed in the attempt to smear Julian. And I had, you know, I don't know, I spent half an hour of my life combating that particular ridiculous lie.
Absolutely. And I know that, you know, we've seen the lies not only in the mainstream press, but also in the altering of the historical record on venues like Wikipedia. And I know that Craig Murray did a great job pointing out the vicious trolling and editing that happens on anti-war, the pages of anti-war advocates like yourself. You know, how do you see that in contrast to what Julian Assange and WikiLeaks does? You know, it's like the embodiment of the lies of the legacy press almost.
Well, I mean, it's the reverse side of the coin. WikiLeaks exposes the crimes of the rich and powerful. Wikipedia and its industry of neocon cells exposes through lying and distorting those who oppose the crimes of the rich and powerful.
Absolutely.
WikiLeaks exposes people with the power to kill other people, who kill other people in industrial quantities. It exposes people who steal other people's money, either directly or indirectly through tax evasion and so on. That's what WikiLeaks does. Wikipedia tries to damage the reputation of those who attack those crimes. So you literally are diametrically opposite. You are completely opposite. And yet your names are so similar. Wikipedia with WikiLeaks. You could easily, you know, mistype it in your telephone. And
absolutely,
the difference between heaven and hell.
Yeah, it's incredible to think that the trolling that happens on Wikipedia and in the legacy press against, you know, truth tellers and WikiLeaks and Julian Assange.
I'm one of the biggest victims of this. Yeah. I seem to have a whole neocon cell specifically dedicated to me. And I happen to know that some of them are very important people indeed. It's flattering in a way. And I'm lucky. I have never read my Wikipedia page because I knew that it would be a playground for those that hate me. And why would I want to read what the people who hate me have to say? And so dispassionately, I can say, as someone who has never read their Wikipedia page and will never read it, I can say, don't trust Wikipedia, on which anyone with the energy to expend to smear other people can do so. And no checks and balances exist to ensure that anything on my Wikipedia page is true. I don't even know if they've got my mother's name right. I do know that they've got her politics wrong. So they might not have her name right. Don't assume that anything about Wikipedia is true. WikiLeaks, on the other hand, I think I'm right in saying, has never once published anything that turned out to be untrue, has never had to retract or apologize for anything that it has ever published. There cannot be a newspaper or a media organization anywhere in the world that could say that. Anywhere.
Absolutely. Even the most well-intentioned media organizations will have had to make a retraction or an update to their content at some time or another. WikiLeaks is completely unique in that way.
You know, the more I mean, I hadn't thought to say that, but the more you think about that fact, the more astounding that is. So they hate WikiLeaks because it's never been wrong. You know, I always joke, if I were to write an autobiography, it would be called I Was Right About Everything. And I was right about every big thing. But WikiLeaks has been right, not just about every big thing, but about every small thing. It's been right about everything. That's why they hate it. That's why they hate it. If you'd been making blunders, if Julian had been telling lies or distorting things, it would be much easier for them. But it's not easy when you're trying to destroy an organization. Wow, that's quite a record. Not enough people know. Not enough people know that.
And I think that that's exactly why you see them having to turn to these schoolyard type insults about, you know, hygiene or anything else, because they cannot attack the veracity of his work.
But by the way, for the record, his hygiene is impeccable. His manners are impeccable. He's not rude in the slightest. None of these things are true. But the fact that such childish, schoolyard, vulgar lies are all they've got, it's a tribute to him and it's a tribute to WikiLeaks.
Absolutely. And you definitely, if there had ever been a misstep, you know, that these powers that be would absolutely have jumped all over it. And the fact that they're quarantined into these ridiculous insults that are obviously a sham is testament to Julian Assange's work and the work of everyone at WikiLeaks to do such a stellar, unique job.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a proper gentleman, is Julian. And I mean that, let me break that word down. He's a gentle man. He's a gentle person that sat behind a keyboard trying to tell the world the truth. What's not to love about that? I never saw any bad thing about Julian. And there's not many people I could say that about. Even my own friends. I wish they didn't do this or that or put things this way or that. But Julian's not like that. He's studious, he's steady, he's calm, measured, and deadly accurate. Deadly accurate. That's why he's where he is.
Absolutely. And one of the things that is also so, heart-wrenching about that is that some of the things that he has done for the benefit of other, whistleblowers and truth tellers, he must have done knowing that it would impact his own ability to see freedom. When he sent help to Edward Snowden, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, he did that. So, that's why he's in the tradition. That's why he's in the tradition, as Dr. Cynthia was saying. He knew that at any time he could have been killed. In a way, it's a mercy that he's still alive, because other people like him have been killed. He could have been killed. They could have grabbed him secretly, like they did. I was involved in the case to some extent, long time ago, 25 years ago. Mordechai Vanunu, a brave Jewish whistleblower, came to London to reveal the secrets of Israel's illegal nuclear arsenal. He was honey-trapped in London, drugged, bound, gagged, and smuggled to to Israel and sentenced to 20 years in solitary confinement. That could have happened to Julian. So, in a sense, we're lucky that that has not yet happened. What they are trying to do is judicially make it happen. Vanunu's jaws were literally wired up like Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lambs, so that he could not speak in court and divulge any more of the secrets of Israel's crimes, for it is a crime to acquire illegal nuclear weapons, not declare them, not subject them to inspection and so on. Wired together so that he could not speak. They want, through a secret trial in the United States, to wire Julian Assange's jaws together and wire his fingers together so that he can no longer expose these crimes.
I think that that is the most brutal imagery, and the fact that it's a real instance that happened to somebody is just unbelievable. But it shows the degree to which any pretense that the United States, UK, Israel have to some sort of moral authority is so deeply, deeply wrong. It just goes without saying, but it's so deeply hypocritical.
As Oscar Wilde put it, the more they talked of their honor, the faster I counted my spoons. The people who talk about their moral standing, the people who talk about their democracies, their human rights, and so on, are but hypocrites. They are amongst the biggest criminals the world has ever seen. The crime against Iraq is one of the gravest crimes in all history. 1 million people died. ISIS were begat. Extremism cascaded around the whole world directly as a result of that crime in Iraq. And while these criminals were carrying out their crime, what was Julian Assange doing? He was trying to stop them. He was trying to expose them. And if he never did anything else in his life, either before or afterwards, his efforts to stop that big crime in Iraq, to expose that big crime in Iraq, should guarantee him a place on the pantheon of heroes. But instead, it's led him to the place he now is. It's a very, very, very sad tale.
Absolutely. And I think that, as you say, he is part of that pantheon of people like, and I was talking about this with Cynthia in the last segment, that he is very much, in my opinion, like a Nelson Mandela. And I think that the response to his situation has to be broad and global, and is similar to that response to Nelson Mandela's imprisonment. And so I think, and other wonderful truth tellers and activists across time, we have to imitate those movements. Do you think that that is beginning to happen at this point?
Possibly not yet. And of course, the danger is that it could reach that critical mass only when it's too late. If Julian, God forbid, were to be seized, were to be extradited, were to be sentenced in a secret trial in the United States, undoubtedly he would become an even greater world figure, but it would be too late then. It would be too late. We must try and force a solution, a diplomatic solution to this question. Julian has political asylum. He is a citizen of Ecuador. Whoever, the British state in the first instance, must negotiate a way out of this situation. Julian Assange, I'm not being too dramatic, I hope his mother's not watching. Julian Assange could die in there. He literally could die. And then his blood will be on the hands of the British state. Or and we could spend another 15 million on keeping him there. And in that case, that would be on the hands of the British state. So as there is no extant case for extradition yet, one assumes, in British hands, then the onus, the ball, is in the British diplomatic court. And the sensible thing to do, the humane thing to do, the just thing to do would be to allow Assange safe passage to Ecuador, of which he is a citizen, and who have granted him political asylum. That's the way out. There's no reason why not. He could pay a fine to the British for having broken the bail conditions, or he could be sentenced to suspended sentence for that, given that he spent instead 5 years in a room, far more than he would have got for breaking the bail conditions.
Multiple times more than the maximum sentence.
Hundreds of times. So that's the way to solve this. And if we had a sane British government, and maybe one day we will, then that sane British government should negotiate that solution. But I don't have any confidence that Boris Johnson is going to negotiate it. Not yet, anyway.
No, and I think that just a moment ago, you brought up an incredibly important point again, which is the health conditions that Julian Assange is in, not just the discomfort generally of being isolated to such a small room, but the fact that, as Susie Dawson and others have reported, his doctors have assessed him to be in a grave health situation before the added isolation took place. So yes, we all need to recognize how dangerous this is. Even if he's not in custody in the United States or by the UK, he's still in danger.
We talked about Mandela. No, let's be clear. Julian is not Mandela. Nobody is Mandela. But
very true.
Even the Boers in apartheid South Africa could not afford the risk of Nelson Mandela dying in their jail. That's why they moved him off the island to first Pollsmoor Prison and then Pollsmoor Hospital. They moved him there because they couldn't run the risk of him dying in their hands. And I say to the British government, you're running the same risks. In fact, you're not being as sensible even as the apartheid regime in South Africa was. You should, at the very least, allow Julian to move to a hospital and have diplomatic protection while he's there. The risk they're taking, the tightrope they're walking, is that somehow we're crying wolf here. Well, it's not us who's saying Julian's life's in danger. It's highly respected medical professionals who are saying it. They're not lying. They don't lie. Doctors don't tell lies. And all these eminent medical practitioners have all testified the state of Julian's health before, as you say, and all the health risks that come with that.
Absolutely. And I am asking all of the panelists because we don't know whether Julian Assange will be able to see this vigil eventually or not, but on the off chance that he does, what would you say to Julian Assange right now to keep his spirits up and to let him know that he's not alone?
I give you my warmest embrace. Although I'm British and we don't normally do this kind of thing, I kiss you on your forehead. You are never out of my thoughts, out of thoughts of my wife and even my children. My children came up with 101 ways that we could spring Julian from his incarceration. Small children I'm talking about, who sat contemplating Batman, Superman type superhero ways that we could help Julian escape. So you're never out of our thoughts. You will never leave our hearts. And we, as long as God gives us breath, we'll continue to defend you and to agitate for your release. And it's my view, as I said at the beginning, Julian Assange should be a Nobel Peace Prize winner, not a prisoner. And insofar as he's a prisoner, all of us are prisoners. We are all imprisoned by Julian Assange's imprisonment, because the truth is being imprisoned, and it's the truth that we need to set us all free.
That is incredibly well put, and I hope that our audience really takes that in and contemplates that, because it's the absolute truth. It has just been an honor to have you with us today and to be able to speak with you about this. You know, I cannot express my personal thanks enough, much less for our audience's sake. And I'm sorry, there's a little bit of delay because of the long distance involved, but thank you so much for speaking with us.
Pleasure.